This video will contain no spoilers for any of the games that we're covering. I will, however, show trailer and gameplay footage, but it will not spoil any major things or plot points. There are also timestamps in the description in case you don't want to watch all of this video. Thank you and enjoy. Well, here we are again. Another year has passed. 2024 is nearing its end, and it's once again time to talk about video games, because I have no life. This year has been quite an alright year for gaming, not one of the best, but there have been some pretty good releases, out of which there still are many I haven't been able to get my hands on. Last year I talked about broken releases being the biggest issue of the games that came out that year. I feel like this year's biggest problem in the industry was the closure of multiple studios and employee layoffs. There were, of course, some studios that pretty much had to be closed. At the same time, however, we saw the closure of Tango Gameworks, the developers of Hi-Fi Rush, among many other games, which was a decision criticized heavily by the gaming community. I don't want to dive too deep into these issues, since I'm by no means informed enough to turn this part of the video into a full-on video essay, but the issues of the gaming industry are something I want to at least briefly touch on in these videos. But now, enough about that. Last year's video where I covered every game I played in 2023 is one of my personal favorite videos I've ever made. It was a really fun experience to make that video, and basically used that as an excuse to talk about games I otherwise never would. And I see that you guys liked it as well, so why not make this a tradition that I'd try to make happen every year. This year, however, we have to do things a little differently. If you remember, last year I mainly dedicated the video to games that were released that year, and left the other games that I played for this small section at the beginning where I covered them quickly. This year, the amount of games that I've played is significantly smaller, hence I will dedicate time to all of the games I played, not just the ones that were released this year. I hope you all are fine with this decision. Just like last year, we'll go from roughly my least favorite game to my game of the year at the end. So, what are we waiting for? Sit down, grab some snacks, and join me on this journey once again as we dive into every game I played in 2024.
What do you wish for most?
Welcome to Freddy's Bad Fantasy, a magical place for kids and grown-ups alike, where fantasy and fun come to life.
Another year, another FNAF game, of course. Now, this game being at the bottom of the list doesn't mean it's a bad game, it just seems to be a bit of a tradition that even if a FNAF game isn't bad, it just doesn't compare to the other games I've played. Into the Pit is one of the better FNAF games in my opinion, and I respect it for doing something the series' other entries have been so hesitant about, that being straying away from the overarching story and telling a separate story that anyone can understand without watching hundreds of game theory videos. So yes, for that, my hat's off to you, game. Well, how's the game itself? It's okay. I think the best part about it is the art. The pixel art style is really cool looking, and way more than I was expecting from this game. The attention to detail in what comes to the locations we explore in the game, as well as the character models, especially these close-up shots of Spring Bonnie, are really cool. The gameplay can be a bit of a hit or miss. I don't hate it, it works well enough for the game, but there are some things that are a bit of an annoyance, such as randomly tripping over if you run for too long. I get it, it's to prevent a player from running forever, but I think there could be other ways to block the player from doing that. I'd lie if I said I remember half of the things that happened in this game, but I still remember enjoying my time with it. For this franchise that sadly has been on the decline for quite a while now, I can see smaller games like this as a breath of fresh air, and I hope they commit to these side projects. I genuinely care more about them than the mainline entries.
What did you do? Just messing around, man. It wasn't serious. I'm such an idiot. Oh, Anna!
There are a few few things I need to make sure you understand.
I'm going to give you 10 seconds.
No, please, no!
I've been hearing so many positive things about Until Dawn since its initial release, and I've also played all of the Dark Pictures anthology games, most of which I liked, so my expectations going into the game that basically started all of this were super high. Until Dawn is a prime example of the original not always being the best. Before you make any assumptions, let me just say that I liked the game. The characters I think were great, some of the most memorable characters in any supermassive game. They actually get quite a bit of development and stuff to do, if you manage to keep them alive, that is. I also really enjoyed the atmosphere of the snowy mountains and the cabins in the forest. It's a really cool stage for the events of the game to play out in. Just like with the Dark Pictures games, you can feel the pressure with each and every decision you're making, and the fear of making a wrong choice and getting a character killed makes you really think twice before you click a button. And the time you're given to make a decision is perfect. It's enough for you to process the possible ramifications of the decisions you have to make, but not enough to overanalyze them, forcing you to make quick choices. For the first half of Until Dawn, I was fully on board with the idea of this being the best choice-based horror game made by Supermassive. Everything just played out super well, and I was really excited to learn more about the killer and the events that surrounded the main plot. However, sadly, the game does have a fall off approximately at the midway point. I don't want to spoil anything, but basically there is something that happens that's a pretty heavy plot twist. I think everyone that has played this game knows exactly what I mean. After this point, I was just less and less interested in what was going on. Basically, the main thing that kept my interest in the game was taken away and replaced with something else, which I didn't enjoy nearly as much. But still, even taking this into account, Until Dawn is a fine horror game, and something I think I can recommend.
The order is gone. I was betrayed by the one I trusted most. I will not be imprisoned again.
I hear you've been busy making yourself the Empire's most wanted.
Jedi Fallen Order is a great game in my opinion, so I was excited to finally play its sequel. This game was broken for a long time after its launch, and I even tried to play it on PC before, but the performance was so terrible that I couldn't even get through the first area. Then I got it on PS5 this year, and not so surprisingly, the console port was way more stable than the PC one, as it sadly often tends to be. That's not to say that the console version doesn't have its issues though. There were numerous frame drops and objects and characters not loading properly, resulting in very awkward looking cutscenes. While the game is definitely playable on consoles, do not expect a butter-smooth, flawless experience. But how's the game itself? It's fine. I'll say right off the bat I like the first game a lot more. Survivor never really caught my interest in its story, unlike its predecessor, which was a shame since I really liked the story of Fallen Order. Here the story just felt like it didn't know where to take itself, and while there definitely were some good moments in there, it all felt a little disconnected and simply uninteresting. There are also some gameplay issues in this game that I'd like to cover. I hate it how it has become a trend to make games as big and open as possible nowadays. Not every game needs to be an open world, and that applies to Jedi Survivor. The game isn't fully open world, but there are numerous open planets to explore, and I'll be honest, I couldn't have been more bored every time I had to go through a planet like this. Keep games that are meant to be linear, please. All of this sounds so negative, and you probably think that I hated the game, but that's not the case. Trust me, if I hate a game, I don't even consider finishing it. One thing that I did like about Jedi Survivor is its combat. It was good in the previous game, but it's even better here. I also really just like the world of Star Wars as a whole, and it just always has this cool and unique vibe to it, and I can't help but just enjoy it. I would like to mention some other things I liked about the game, but for spoiler reasons I choose not to. Just know that I like the game, but not as much as its predecessor.
The time is right!
Let them have it, fellas!
A power that takes many forms. Might even prove to be your salvation, depending on where you end up.
The shadows are getting even more powerful. We need to get stronger too.
My persona represents the strength of my heart. And from here on, my heart will never falter.
Maybe we really are like heroes of justice.
Here's a game franchise that I've been hearing a lot of great things about for the longest time, but due to their length, I've been a bit hesitant to dip my toes into this franchise. Well, it's time I finally did. I started out with Persona 3 Reload, and I found myself having a pretty good time with it. These types of JRPGs are something that I'm not too familiar with. Persona 3 balances two very different types of games, basically. For half the game, you're fighting monsters in this place called Tartarus, upgrading your characters and gaining new skills, etc. For the other half of the game, you go through what is practically just a visual novel where you can move around. And no, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. During these slower moments you get a lot of character development and interesting backstories. However, I must say that it got quite repetitive at a certain point. This is very much a preference thing, but I can only do so much of running around a school building talking to people I barely care about in order to gain levels for my social skills so I can talk to more people. Like, it's not bad, but I don't want to do this much of it. And I emphasize, this is purely a preference thing. These sections have a place in the game. What I really liked about the game are the characters. Every single character that has even somewhat of a bigger role in the story is interesting, and the amount of backstory that exists for each character was really surprising. The combat in this game is also fine, I had fun with it. What I can say gets super repetitive after a while is Tartarus. You run through what feels like the same areas over and over again, and I wish there was more variety to it. And before you comment anything, I know Persona 3 Reload is a remake of an old game, so I can excuse some of its flaws. One last thing I have to mention is the game's soundtrack. It is an absolute banger. There are some really good tracks in this game. Go listen to it. And play the game as well, if you want to.
조심해! 리스팅되지 않는 네이티브야! 아담, 뒤로 물러나! 마더스피어는 절대적이야! 이 레거시는 믿을 수 없어요! 그렇죠? 그렇다고 말해줘요!
Stellar Blade was one of my most anticipated games for the year. I've been following this game since its first trailers came out, and I was looking forward to it. Did it deliver? Yes it did. I went into this game expecting a fun game that, while probably not a masterpiece, still would deliver an enjoyable action experience. And I was right, this game is exactly that. Of course, this game spawned its fair share of controversy upon release, and while I don't want to dive too deep into that, I do want to say that the controversy was fucking stupid. It is completely idiotic to tell people what they should and shouldn't like, and if anything, this controversy made me more interested in playing Asian games than Western ones. But I promised I would keep this part short, so let's move on. Stellar Blade's highlight is absolutely its gameplay. I'm a fan of Souls-likes, that's probably not a surprise to anyone who's been watching my videos in the past, and Stellar Blade manages to deliver a really solid and fun Souls-like experience. By no means is it as punishing as some other Souls-likes out there, but I don't think it has to be. So if you enjoy this type of combat, Stellar Blade may very well be a game you'd enjoy. The world is a little bit of a mixed bag. At times it looks great, at times it's more empty than my bank account. When it's good, however, it's pretty good. The story of the game is its weakest point for sure. I don't remember anything that happened in it, nor did I really care about it at any point, but games like this are not played for their stories. One thing I absolutely do want to shout out before we move on is that the soundtrack of this game is insanely good. Like seriously, I rarely listen to soundtracks of the games I play after I finish them, but still to this day, I'm listening to Stellar Blade's soundtrack occasionally. But yeah, in conclusion, Stellar Blade is a fun experience that I can recommend to most people.
In that forsaken place, blood must spill.
It took over 2 years, but Elden Ring's long-awaited DLC finally released this summer. This was easily the most excited I had been since the release of the main game, so getting to dive right back into Elden Ring's world was a delight. The expectations were through the roof. Shadow of the Erdtree is a great DLC. Not the best DLC From Software has made, but a very enjoyable expansion nonetheless. It may very well be the biggest DLC I've ever seen. Seriously, this DLC is bigger than most full games out there. The world is absolutely massive and the exploration is about just as fun as in the main game. Getting to dive into a world full of mysteries, things to explore and enemies to fight is an experience that isn't delivered this well very often in the gaming landscape. That feeling of having no map markers to guide you, but the game just letting you immerse yourself in a fictional world, man, that feeling is something else. Shadow of the Erdtree does not come without its issues though. I feel like most of the issues I have with it are very subjective issues, and I don't see everyone talking about these, so maybe that's just a skill issue on my end. My main problem in this DLC is the boss fights. It definitely is a thing that annoys me in the main game as well, but the DLC just cranks this issue up to 11. Most of the bosses are just not fun. They have way too much health and their movesets are annoying. Yes, that is a skill issue. Yes, I admit it fully. But this is also my video, hence I'll let you know what I think of these things. I'll give credit where credit is due. The bosses are often very beautiful to look at, and the spectacle is most of the time on another level compared to FromSoft's previous work. I just really wish they were fun to fight. But yeah, I do think this DLC is a must play if you enjoyed the main game, and prepare to sink a lot of hours into this one because there is a lot to do. Hollow Knight is one of those games you can't stop hearing about. For the longest time I had planned on playing this game, and this year I finally took the plunge. The team behind this game is a very small indie team, so what they were able to achieve with Hollow Knight is marvelous. Not only is this game filled to the brim with content, that content is actually really good content. The world feels completely dead, yet completely alive at the same time, which create this really cool and unique atmosphere that you can't help but admire. While not really open world, Hollow Knight gives me a feeling similar to that of Elden Ring, or well, to be precise, I think it's closer to Dark Souls. You have a world that you know is big, but the size of the map still manages to surprise you every time you see it expand. You also have no idea what awaits you as you explore, so you always proceed with both caution and overwhelming intrigue. For a 2D game, the combat is very good. Sure, it isn't as in-depth as something like Dark Souls, but it doesn't have to be. It works well enough and feels satisfying after you conquer a difficult area or a boss fight. One thing I was expecting was that the game would be harder. I had talked with many people who had played it, and most of them compared the difficulty to, well, Dark Souls. So I went into this game expecting to suffer. The main game of Hollow Knight really isn't all that difficult, which was surprising to me. I will say that the post-game extra content can be painfully difficult, so the difficult factor is also found for those who want to go torture themselves. This game is absolutely worthy of your time and money, it's basically free for the content it offers. I do sincerely hope that we get to see Silksong in the next decade or so.
I got a letter. The name on the envelope said Mary. My my wife's name. It's ridiculous. Mary died of that damn disease 3 years ago. So then why am I looking for her?
Here's another game I've been wanting to play for a long time, or well, the original one that is. Silent Hill 2 is often hailed as one of the best horror games of all time, so the expectations for the remake were through the roof. Following the promotional campaign of the remake was certainly a sight to behold. The community seemed to go from loving the game to hating it to back to loving it. It was just a big back and forth game. And since I hadn't played the original, I had no full understanding of why the community was changing their minds all the time. Well, the game came out, and the reviews ended up being overwhelmingly positive, so I picked the game up and played it through. And yeah, wow, this is a really good horror game. From playing so many horror games in the past, I feel like I've gotten pretty numb to them, and they rarely manage to scare me anymore, but that's what Silent Hill 2 was thankfully able to do. The atmosphere is really cool and terrifying, the sound design is impeccable, with the movement of the enemies always sounding like they're right next to your ear, and the game doesn't rely on jump scares in order to keep things tense. This is exactly how you build a great horror game. Oh, and the story is really good too, I was fully interested from beginning to end. Honestly, as for complaints, I can really think of only one. The game gives you way too many resources. I was always carrying so many healing items and ammunition, so I never felt like I needed to manage my resources. It also doesn't help that the melee weapon you're given is very effective, and taking down enemies with it isn't all too difficult, so even if you run out of ammo, you're not completely fucked. For horror game fans, Silent Hill 2 is a must play, but this game is not for the faint-hearted, believe that. So here we are, we've arrived at my game of the year. This year's Game of the Year will be remembered for its massive hype among gamers prior to its release, its unique and groundbreaking mechanics, and its large player count on day one and beyond. This game, of course, is Concord. Why do I keep making the same joke every year? No, but for real, my game of the year is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and before I talk about it, I also dumped this game's predecessor, Final Fantasy VII Remake, in here as well. This was done because, first of all, it is way easier to talk about them both back to back, and they are also very close to each other in terms of how much I enjoyed them.
The beginning of the end. The celebration of the faithful. A watershed moment for all mankind.
Hey kids, sorry we're late.
You're going to pay! Now, who wants to be the first lucky lady? Hey boss, you guess?
Final Fantasy as a franchise is a bit of an unknown series for me. These two games here on the list are the only Final Fantasy games I have ever played. But as you can probably guess, my experience was super positive with these two, so I definitely need to check out some of the other games in the franchise. Hopefully they make it onto the lists of upcoming years. Well, what makes both Remake and Rebirth so great? It's a variety of things, of course. So let's start with the gameplay. Both of these games have the same combat system, albeit it is expanded in Rebirth. The combat is the perfect mix of real-time and turn-based combat, and it works wonderfully. Before playing these games, I would have been very skeptical if anyone described the combat to me like that, but after experiencing it myself, I can say that it's really clever and well put together. The best thing about these two games, however, is the story. Personally, I think the story that these two games put together is one of the best I've experienced in video games, period. So unless the third upcoming sequel that's meant to close this trilogy off completely fumbles, I'd say that we got something really special at hand here. The characters in the story are so lovable, even the characters that weren't my favorites were still interesting, at least to some extent. The story delivers twists and turns that cannot be seen coming, and it will definitely pull your heartstrings as well, just you wait. I've already talked about Rebirth in an older video, so I'm not gonna go too in depth, But if you want to hear more of my thoughts, feel free to check that video out. But yeah, in conclusion, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is my personal game of the year. So yeah, that's it for every game I played this year. I know the amount of games I played is kind of pathetic this year, I admit that, but I think it's better to not force yourself to play games if you don't feel like doing it. But yeah, what games did you guys play this year? Which game would you consider to be your personal game of the year? Please leave a comment down below, you know I love to read those. Just a side note here, on December 31st I will be releasing a video covering every TV show and movie I watched this year, and I can spoil you, there's a crap ton of those, so it's gonna be a long video. So if you're interested, feel free to check that out once it releases. Or it might have already been released, depending on when you're watching this video. But yeah, once more, thank you for watching, we'll meet again in some other video. Hopefully. See ya!